Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. This is another interview in the series exploring the politics of trauma, where we're looking at the kind of different forces that shape our lives and that can shape our bodies and our nervous systems. And in this episode, we're going to be talking all about class. So we're going to be I'm going to be interviewing one of my close friends, my bestie. So she's using the name Diffwys Criafol, and she will laugh at me and my pronunciation, even though I was literally born in Wales and half my family speak Welsh, but I can't. I need to learn Welsh badly. But yeah, it's kind of informal because we're really old close friends, but we've had so many conversations about class over the years. And I really wanted to have her on the show to talk about kind of class and how it connects to trauma. So yeah, we explore different things, how this kind of sort of analysis of if you sell your labor, your working class can, bring some kind of unity and struggle, but can also really flatten people's experiences and kind of erase some of the quite serious differences between people's life experiences. We talk about concepts like the underclass, where people are kind of occupying like different kind of, several different kinds of oppressions and different kind of desperate situations and have, many barriers to like making life stable. We talk about middle class culture and how a lot of it is built on kind of furthering oneself and social mobility and less about like class solidarity and looking after each other. We talk about, kind of not leaving people behind and like what kind of showing up for each other looks like. We talk about like kind of class safety nets, recovering from trauma while still in the midst of kind of, like challenging like life experiences, right? We also talk about, how people are like very stigmatized and different forms of prejudice. There's all the things basically. We kind of go through loads of different questions around class and trauma and experiences in different anarchist movements, and what would a kind of focus on class really look like in terms of like actual solidarity and mutual aid. So I'm extremely grateful for her time. I hope you find the interview interesting. I hope if you're from a more working class background, maybe you find it validating and helpful. And if you're not, then maybe it's also, interesting to hear and interesting to lean into different perspectives. I just want to say like this isn't an academic approach, right? Like we're not talking about like social economic theory and all this stuff. Like we're talking about class as like a lived experience. And I also want to like preface that like, we're talking about it in this like kind of England and Wales context, which, where we do have like vast amounts of privilege compared to most of the planet, but, we still live in like a heavily class stratified society. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of name that. We talk about how class intersects with different oppressions, but we're also both white and cis and fairly able-bodied. So yeah, there's kind of like more nuance there. But anyway, we dive into all that stuff during the interview. I really hope you find it interesting. I'll put some of the books she mentions in the show notes so you can check those out. I hope you learn something. Okay. Thank you so much for being here and giving me your kind of time and energy today. Please, can you introduce yourself, your pronouns, like any kind of political affinities or projects you'd like to include? Like, I know we'll do like a much longer introduction, but I just wondered if you could share a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, my pronouns are she, her. Like over the years, I've been involved with different groups, but 2 years ago I had my daughter, and I wasn't able to be part of radical movements in the way that I was before. But I did manage to get to a few things organised by Births Beyond Bars, which is a really great group campaigning for the end of imprisonment for pregnant people. And I also was part of campaigning to drop the charges against the young people in Cardiff that were criminalised for the riots caused by police, causing the death of two children basically in Ely in Cardiff. So and at the moment I'm just trying my best to trying to work out how to be part of a movement for change, but in a way that like I can manage, because I've got to earn money to live and to pay for childcare to be able to do anything. So I'm basically trying to write, and mainly about interclass experience and in radical movements often. So yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. So we're going to be talking about trauma and class today. Yeah, and I know those are like really huge topics. And yeah, I'm obviously like really proud that like I've known you a long time and like we're super close friends and been through a lot together. But for like people who don't know you, who haven't had that pleasure, can you share a little bit more about yourself? Like whatever you feel comfortable sharing, like just kind of like for context.
Yeah, sure. Well, I met Nicole when we were doing something against the NATO summit in Newport in 2014. And at the time, my brother was in prison, and, it was kind of felt a lonely experience to have, family go through these kinds of things. And in the kind of anarchist, activist, whatever scene, they weren't the people like that. So when I met Nicole, something sort of clicked, and I got involved in the Empty Cages Collective, which was basically trying to be a catalyst for the abolition movement in the UK. And this was like before it was kind of really spoken about much, apart from in like, random academic circles. Or it was a grassroots movement in the USA and other parts of the world, but it was not very known around here. So to be honest, yeah, I was part of also those anarchists and like the Welsh language movement and other kind of things, like a lot. But from 2014 to basically before around the pandemic, I was mostly doing things in different prisoner support and different like prison abolition kind of groups. And yeah, some of it was sometimes it was difficult working with people that were basically just like my family and were triggering to me in the same way my family can be triggering to me emotionally. But also it was just as hard working with, quite middle class and, and self-consciously privileged like activists in a different way. And I feel like, the experiences of trauma were definitely one of the things that made it emotionally difficult to exist and work in that world. Nicole and I are good friends. Nicole was actually there when I had my baby, holding my hand while I was being cut open with the cesarean section. So knowing Nicole was and working with Nicole for many years was with you was like, a big thing for me, because there's not many people that have the kind of shared experience like this, I feel, in social movements. But that's kind of it.
Oh, and that was a very memorable day when your little one was born. So I know, like again, trauma and class are like big things, and I think there's this like union kind of like Marxist-y kind of like approach where it's like anyone who sells their labor is like somehow working class, and it's like all of us against like the fucking landed gentry or something. And I think it really like can invisibilize different people's experience. And I know like class is like really hard to define, but I just wondered if you could like speak to that a little bit and like share like your perspectives on like what is class and like why does it matter?
Yeah, well, like it's something that it's been hard to get to grips with over the years, because as someone that like believes in revolution and believes in like, destroying capitalism, like we're working with the social movements we've got. And, there was the Occupy movement, all of us against the 1%. And, that makes sense in one way, because the 1% owns more than like the rest of us combined. But the nuances of everything in between is pretty important, because it's literally how divide and rule works in a way where, some sections of our society have been bribed to control other sections of society in order to maintain order and to make us all feel like we all have a shot at being one of those like middle class people, and that if we're not like that, it's kind of our fault because we live in a meritocracy. But like some things that I've read in the last few years that have helped me make sense of this was there is a book called The Middle Class is the Enemy. It's quite a provocative title, but it does talk about this situation where people have been bought off to have a stake in a system and have control over other people, like, landlords, managers, bosses, people that work in things that are entangled with surveillance and control of working class and underclass people. Another book that was like, a big moment for me was, obviously Dee Hunter's book. And it was just, it was just amazing to read, and, really, really harrowing as well at the same time, because, this person's been through so much, and the people in his life has been through so much as well. And then one book that I never bothered to read because I thought, I'm on the left, I'd probably know everything anyway. Like the book was kind of advertised as a book for people that weren't so aware. But Owen Jones's book, Chavs, like I recently listened to it on audiobook, and actually it really contextualizes the way things have changed, like why there's like kind of an identity crisis of the working class at the moment. How Margaret Thatcher, how she absolutely decimated the heavy industries and the unions and the communities, like totally slaughtered the communities, and created all this mass unemployment that was kind of masked by things like incapacity benefits. Obviously, there are genuinely disabled people, like people in my family that needed the incapacity benefits when it was that. But like in Owen Jones's book, it talks about how this was used to sort of massage the figures and employment figures after so many people, like in the height of the Thatcher years, 3 million people were unemployed. And they ran a campaign against Labour before she got in. Labour isn't working because there were 1 million unemployed. But so basically the destruction of people's livelihoods like this, like it meant that there was a loss of identity, and then there was it led to a portrayal of these people without jobs being feckless, they're lazy, it's their fault they don't have a job, rather than all the work in that community is gone, that's been there for generations, is gone. And it's just, as more industry has left the UK for different reasons, and Margaret Thatcher's initiative of buy your council house as well, get a stake in capitalism. It's like, so that book was really, really quite interesting in contextualizing this and the whole kind of thing. The unions now, I can't imagine it was like this in the beginning, but Owen Jones's book talks about how in the beginning unions were run by and for working class people. Now they are a career in themselves, and people earning really high wages and pretty much out of touch with a lot of people that they would represent as workers. There's so many people, so many things have been privatized, so the unions are strong in the public sector but not so much in the private sector. Like conditions are so bad in so many workplaces. There's just a really high turnover, and like it talked in the book about how it's so hard to do workplace organising because people in supermarkets and other like jobs in areas that used to have like heavy industry, their turnover is really high because the conditions are so awful. And so it's like trying to think about like there's a book also by Dan Evans in Cardiff called, what's it called? It's written by Dan Evans, and it's something the rise of the petty bourgeoisie, and basically it talks about how most people are now middle class. And that was really refreshing because a lot of people on the left wing just want to, I think fundamentally part of it comes down to people on the left feeling self-conscious about their privilege and wanting to be working class. And like, instead of owning the privilege, kind of just saying, no, we're all working class. And it kind of totally, like you said, flattens everyone's experiences, invisibilizes people that have much more, you know, the class oppression is like 1,000-fold, you know, it comes at you in loads of different ways. The stigma, the, you know, inability to get by day to day, the just like so many things. And it's like, yeah, it's like, I've been trying to read to get to terms with it, but at the end of the day, you feel things in your gut, like what kind of your relationship with class is. And when people are kind of misusing or misunderstanding the word, it does feel painful, because it does kind of, you know, flatten your experiences, and it doesn't kind of respect the nuances. Like, there's so many nuances in it. There's people, you know, that grew up really, really working class, but are like kind of are managing to get by now. Their immediate like family are managing to get by okay now. They were not in the situation that they were growing up. And like, this is like, you know, a nuanced difference from people that are still in the job centre, maybe have active addiction. Everyone in their life is in the same situation as them as well, and trying to support them. And, you know, their circle of friends is the same. It's not black and white, because obviously there's every combination in between. Like, a lot of people who are managing now have lots of people in their lives that are still struggling. Like maybe like kind of that's the situation I relate to most, because I've managed to, you know, through to I have a job now, and yeah, I'm renting, and I've got like really dodgy and bad housing situation where, you know, I was evicted last year and things like this. But like, the people in my life, like members of my family and some friends, are in a much worse situation to me, much more precarious, much more. So it's just, yeah, like, this question is so emotionally charged for me. It's just hard not to go on and on about it. But yeah, this is it's everything we do every day and how we live, and it is pretty old fashioned, and it's quite, reminds me more of the authoritarian left, people that kind of ignore any difference like that, you know. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, you know, like you said, like, things can get like really flattened. Like, you know, there are different experiences for people, like if they're racialized, if they're disabled, like, you know, if they have like immigration status here, like there's just so many layers to it. And I think you're right that it is very like emotionally charged, and often somehow that emotional charge can like just not distract, but like people can, you know, we don't always think about like the structural things, like, you know, like why are landlords like contributing to poverty and stuff, rather than like everyone just feeling uncomfortable with how much privilege they have, if that makes sense, with this real like navel gazing kind of like middle class trait of just like, you know, not wanting to talk about it or whatever. And like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it is like complex. But I just, yeah, like you did mention D. Hunter in the book, like Chav Solidarity, which I think has had like a big impact on people's like understanding of class. And I know that there is this kind of like framework of like underclass. And I just wondered, and you mentioned it in your introduction as well, I just wondered, like, what do you think about that kind of underclass like worldview? Like, you know, what is the underclass, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I like definitely, like, I agree with what you said about like those intersecting oppressions, and like underclass in a way is, it feels like when several of these oppressions co-occur, and it creates kind of a really, really people are put in desperate situations. Like, I'm kind of grappling with what underclass is, because it feels like although I obviously, this stuff in the Hunter's book, I couldn't relate to all of it, of course, but like people in my family, there have been like put into different institutions, and we had, you know, our family had some intervention from social services growing up and stuff. Like, yeah, it, like, I think it was a really important book that kind of showed a way people live that a lot of people are really ignorant to, that maybe, like, when people write about underclass people, they think about like gangsters and, you know, really kind of weird like TV depictions of it, and it's usually written by middle class people. But like, the whole like spectrum of experience that underclass people kind of have, and, you know, all the barriers there are to like making life a little bit stable. And the complicated feelings are things like, you know, I could cut off everyone I know and care about that are struggling in a similar way. I could become like completely, you know, selfish and just think about getting my life on track, and get some stability. But that's just not the world that you want to live in. And Chav Solidarity, it felt like that was the beauty that came in that book, that people in that situation help each other in a way that honestly like is completely foreign to like typical middle class culture, because middle class culture, I think, is built on something that you're going to further yourself and you're not going to let anyone pull you down. And, you know, social mobility, because a lot, you know, the whole thing of being socially mobile, it's, you know, being socially mobile, it's quite a precarious place, because you could be downwardly socially mobile, you know, you could lose everything. But it's like, it feels like, yeah, Chav Solidarity, the way people help each other in really like, you know, special ways, that's really beautiful. And that's why, you know, people would rather stay and support each other than just, you know, sack everyone off and just decide, I'm going to be a careerist, and, you know, and that's something I'm grappling with, to be honest, because now I have a daughter, I feel like I really have to try and push, you know, get some stability, because like I don't want her to have a lot of difficult experiences that is inevitable when you are not like middle class or whatever. But also I feel like it's really hard to like go forward and like and do all the ridiculous things capitalism asks of you when you've got crisis after crisis after crisis happening all around you. And it's like the emergencies that family members or friends are having, and it just feels really hard to like, you know, manage all of that plus all of your own struggles. And it's just, you know, like there was a lot of stuff about, like, I agree with having boundaries, but having boundaries sometimes, and it's quite, feels like the self-care boundaries stuff, it feels like quite a middle class thing, like where it came through. But I feel like if middle class people with the time, and some people do, like this is, you know, there are exceptions to the rule, and I've experienced this, if people shared their ability to like support other people and to kind of absorb the shocks that their underclass or working class friends have, then that can go a long way in kind of sharing the privilege and you know, helping people kind of keep an even keel. But it's like, if all feels still pretty vague and hard to pinpoint, because I think like the whole trauma aspect of it, it's really it's a really big part of it. And obviously people are traumatized for lots of different things, but it feels like when trauma and class intersect, like for example, like a member of my family was like sectioned like, you know, 5 times in like 4 days by the police, and the psychiatric hospital wouldn't accept him. Why would they? I'm pretty sure they would accept him if he was like a middle class person, but because he'd been to prison before for like you know, for as a result of his addictions and stuff, and because of and because he's like big and you know, covered in tattoos and scars and stuff, I really feel like he did not get the support on the NHS that other people would have had. And like it feels like if things go wrong, if you're middle class, you know, there is a cushion, there's a safety net, be it family that have money, or you know, you have money to like, you know, be able to not work for a bit or pay for like some healthcare if you can't get it on the NHS. But it's like, yeah, like they're linked, but I still don't understand quite how they're linked. But there's a gut feeling I have that they are really close things, but it's really hard to verbalize it because everyone's experience is so different. And yeah, it's just hard to bring it together in a way, like.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like it's definitely like super complex, and I think what you're saying about like the safety net is like really critical, because like, yeah, like I think a lot of people with kind of like, who've grown up with like a lot of stability, for example, like I know there's like a lot of emotional deprivation and a lot of kind of middle and upper class experiences, but I think like you might experience something traumatic, but ultimately like you're not then also worrying about like if you're going to eat that day, right? Like it is different. And I think like the trauma of like poverty, for example, like is traumatizing in and of itself. Like even if you had a really loving family who were really stable and didn't have kind of like really challenging like mental health issues like the way that our parents kind of did, like you would still be affected by this kind of like intense like survival scarcity feeling that like dominates like working class life, right? But yeah, are there any other ways you think like trauma kind of relates to class?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the being like having this scarcity of resources, like moving house, half a dozen time when you're growing up, it's, yeah, like you just, like trauma and class are like completely intertwined. And that's especially, after what Thatcher did and people, all the problems that came with unemployment, and how, traumatic for the community it is to be unemployed and not knowing if you can, that being in like real poverty in that way, it's like, yeah, it's just part and parcel of it. And then people self-medicate and addiction comes into it, and with addiction comes more trauma, and it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. And like more kind of the ways that middle class, upper class people have to cope with things, like of course there's addiction there, but if you have an addiction and you're middle class or upper class, you can somehow sometimes still live a stable life. Like I knew someone that had addiction to heroin, but they had a high paying job and they had enough money, so it actually did not turn their life upside down like it does for people that are scraping the pennies together or turning to like legally risky behavior to like basically get money so they can numb their pain. And there's things like you can pay for therapies, like culturally there's more like ways to like work through pain and trauma. But if you don't have access to those things, and then it's just alcohol is and people are time poor as well as money poor, so people don't, even if they had the money to access therapies, people don't often have time or childcare. And on top of this, like going on my experience now, I was under the perinatal mental health team after I had my daughter because well, long story short, my mum had postpartum psychosis. I was really worried about developing this because, it can be genetic. So I contacted the perinatal mental health team, and they talked to me. And although I didn't develop postnatal psychosis, which actually Nicole was a big part of supporting me because I was so worried about getting it. Like, Nicole, you supported me a lot through that. I didn't develop it, but the perinatal mental health team saw I had a lot of trauma, and for the first time in my life, so it's like a proper psychologist for an extended period of time. And I was offered things like EMDR, which I'd wanted for years, but actually when we tried to get down to it, because every week something new and awful was happening, like my brother was being arrested and going in and out of jail, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and then I was evicted, and and then a whole host of other things in between. I can't remember now, but oh yeah, I've had an awful situation at my workplace, where there was ableism and classism going on, and it was really mentally hard. But basically, my psychologist told me I can't do MDR with you because, and I'd read this in Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, which is a really good book actually, and a lot less objectifying than other books like The Body Keeps the Score. So this basically, they said that until your life is stable, we can't do treatment for trauma, because I was in active trauma. So there was no point in me having treatment for, different trauma in my past. I was in it now, like through being like a new parent that was, in a precarious position, like, in working class or whatever, or surrounded by people that are underclass. But like, yeah, so it's like you can't, even if you did have access to therapies, unless you know that you have a home, that you have, that you're going to be able to pay for heating and for food, and that, that you have a somewhat secure future, and that the people around you, because my dad's illness wasn't the only thing that worried me. Like, he works in London, he sleeps as his work as a carer, and he stays with friends, and he's done this for 10 years, so he doesn't actually have a place to live in London. My brother lives in North Wales and in my dad's house, but actually my brother is in such a vulnerable state and has so many problems and like the insane stuff that keeps happening. It wouldn't really work for my dad to live there. So it's like, where is my dad going to live? Like, I was just thinking about this, like, and when I was evicted, I was like, where am I going to, if I don't find somewhere, and if I'm housed in a hostel, family hostel by the council, my dad's not going to have anywhere to live out his last, time. So yeah, I was like overwhelmed at that point, and like I was told that there was no point in having therapy for trauma because I was, and like people, so many people are in this situation. I'm not an anomaly. 1 in 5 kids in Wales live in poverty, and people who live in poverty, our lives are usually really, really, really chaotic. And yeah, it's like, like the therapies is like, 2 steps forward. Like, the first thing people need to kind of deal with trauma is to not be in a traumatic situation anymore. And I remember talking to you about this, Nicole, a lot, about the whole concept of therapy for people in prison. Like, yeah, therapy for people in prison, but how about people not being in prison? Because the idea of giving therapy to people when they are in active trauma in a place that is actively really disturbing and traumatizing, it kind of, defeats the point. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, kind of thinking about these things.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that's why with my like herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course, like I wanted it to be framed as like people that are experiencing like ongoing traumatic stress and like what things can help their nervous systems to like survive those experiences. Because yeah, like the whole kind of PTSD framework is like you've had this traumatic event in your past that you're trying to heal from, and it doesn't really like do justice to like the complexity of it or the fact that it's ongoing. And like, yeah, like you said, it's like, yeah, like it's also why with the course I didn't want to do it so that people had some sort of exchange of like, oh, if you can't afford the course, you can come and help like weed my garden or some shit. Because I think it's really offensive, because like you said, it's like it's like literally not just about money, right? And I think that's how a lot of people, like, a lot of people from a middle class background will be like, oh, I'm so poor. But it's actually, no, you're not poor, like you're broke. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like a different thing. And I think we can't reduce class to how much money is in your bank account or like your economic status in that point. Because like you said, it's, it's all of these factors. And yeah, like I think there is a tendency for people to just want to like leave people behind, like I think if I'd have left prison and not continued to support my friends in there, I probably would have, my mum like remarried when I left home and, met a middle class guy with resources and bought this amazing place with land. I mean, it's his place and I moved in here. So it's like this huge access to like stability that I never had growing up. Like I lived in like 21 houses or something by the time I was 16. But it's like, if I'd have just left my friends in prison to kind of rot, I probably would have had a fairly stress-free life, right? Like I could have just, you know, I mean, I didn't like left home at 16, so I didn't have like GCSEs, I mean, A levels or whatever. But anyway, but I'm just saying, like, there is this tendency for people to like leave each other behind somehow because they're like, yeah, you're too chaotic. Like, I actually had a guy break up with me once who was just like, yeah, like I can't deal with your life, like, because every month was like a different thing. Every month was like a different, you know, suicide attempt by a close friend, or supporting like someone who was dying and doing like loads of caring labor and like looking after my grandparents and just like running up and down the country, and then trying to do like loads of like class-based like survival organizing stuff around prison, like with you. But anyway, I'm like rambling now, but I just like wanted to ask about, you know, like, okay, I mean, you've already spoken to this like already about like, you know, what do you think people have as like options for accessing support? Like, I know for me, like seeing my mum like clinically depressed, like pretty much my entire childhood, like having nervous breakdowns, being suicidal, but like not managing to access help, like counseling, or even like a healthcare practitioner, you know, like a herbalist. Like if someone had given her hormonal support, like I think everything could have been different. But you know, she didn't access that support because of always being at the breadline. And like that's, you know, why I wanted to kind of create a clinic that was like sliding scale and like free to people like in need. Yeah. And you know, working class folks are nearly always like the most affected by traumatic shit, but it always feels like there's like, you know, sweet fuck all available in terms of like support or solidarity. And I just wondered, like, yeah, like what are your thoughts on, you know, accessing support for people, or like when has support that you've been given like felt kind of meaningful, you know, like what do you think kind of needs to be done, if that makes sense, other than, you know, just like abolishing capitalism and this whole horrible system?
Like, first of all, I want to say, like, definitely not rambling. You're not rambling, because it's important for people to hear these things. Like, I've been dumped by like 2 friends in my life because, like, even though I was always careful to be like consensual about talking about my like kind of chaotic life, they just, yeah, like I had some pretty like serious legal, like, yeah, I had a pretty serious like court case a couple of years ago, as you remember probably. And yeah, I lost a friend because like the chaos is just too much for people and it disturbs their peace. And these are radical anarchists, and it's just like yeah, like it's important to talk about it. And like all those things you talk about, like moving house all the time, like I was the same. And people just think that it's being broke and that's it, and it's that simple. But it's like the whole like experience of it, it's like a different universe living day by day. And like when you like, in terms of like health support to be able to like withstand this, like part of me just feels like I just want to say like like there was a thing, a meme or whatever I saw recently that said no amount of gentle parenting can address like an unjust society. And I was, because I've got a daughter, I've been putting loads of pressure on myself to basically be the perfect parent that is not gonna transfer all this trauma down to her. But I haven't, I feel like I'm doing a fantastic job so far. I'm just literally doing what I can. But in terms of like health, access to healthcare, what is available, I remember having, when I was pregnant, a consultation with you, and it was like a very long conversation talking about all my physical and like, you know, somewhat emotional stuff. And you know, when you're in fight or flight, you don't notice your body, you don't notice the feelings you have in the body. I didn't really notice that I'd had like ulcers for like months on end. I didn't notice the pain here or there that I had, because like I had lots of problems with musculoskeletal stuff. And like, it's, you know, like the Gabor Mate book is really interesting. The Myth of Normal, it talks about the immune system and all this kind of stuff and the impact stress has on it. And like, yeah, like people that are underclass are under an immense amount of stress all the time and become dislocated from their bodies. And I did feel that talking to you for that like extended period of time, you know, even being able to notice your body and think about your body. And and the tonics you gave me, it was really, really good. And like I'm hoping to do your course like soon, because I go through like bursts of doing things that kind of help me a little bit. When I kind of address a problem I have, like I've got bad insomnia, I addressed my sleep a little bit, that got better, but then other things fell to the wayside. It's just like being time poor, and it's being really hard to look after ourselves basically. But I do feel like the stuff you're doing and the way you're doing it, that it's like, free if someone needs it, but that people that can afford it respectfully pay. And the people with resources respectfully pay, I think, is like the way forward. Because like we are not gonna move forward with this like rigid class structure without people that have the privilege being able to share it somewhat. And it's also rewarding to have people from different walks of life in your life. Like, us interclass people, we don't just take. Like you, Nicole, you're one of the most giving people I know. I get, I try and give a lot to the people that are in my life, and a lot of other people as well. Like it just feels like don't interact with people like you're, supporting them out of charity. It's like, it's a two-way thing. Like middle class or like privileged people could learn a lot of things and get perspective on their own lives through interacting with different people in a way that is in solidarity. So I don't have much ideas about how we can like heal the trauma. Like one thing that people have been talking about, especially in like I was involved in the Kurdistan Solidarity Network, talking about distributing wealth, like people with money giving money to people that don't have money, and like that people did that a few times. I think like solidarity economy kind of framework, like and like because it's quite traumatizing not having enough money for the basics. When there is a cash injection, like it can buy you some breathing space that you desperately need to plan your next move to cope with your ongoing poverty or whatever. So like I know like some like left groups that have like at Christmas or whatever, everyone with money put money in, and then people that don't have money take some money out, and it was brilliant, to be honest. So I think thinking like that is a good way as well, and it's in the same kind of principles as the stuff you're doing, Nicole. So that's it.
Oh, I think we've talked about this as well, right? Of like when like it's like the things that people actually need that are like survival orientated are somehow like the least sexy campaigns or something. Does that make sense? Or like people will like almost like put their nose up at like some kind of like picket at someone's workplace or something to get like a 10p increase in wages or something, and they'll just be like, oh, it's reformist, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, actually for those people working in that place, like that little amount is going to make a big difference to them. And like like I think a lot of like movement stuff like doesn't focus on this kind of like helping each other survive somehow. And I think people who are sort of more like femme socialized, like we're a bit more socialized to be like carers, or like I think me and you both like had similar childhoods in the sense of like wanting to take on like caring, well not wanting but having to take on like survival based caring responsibilities within our families. And like that is interesting that it kind of continues into like movement spaces. The fact that we both organize around like like health or like poverty, or I worked as a carer, or do you know what I mean? But I just wanted to ask because like I think a lot of people listening, like obviously there's like herbalists and stuff, but I think a lot of people who it sounds really pretentious to be like who follow the Solidarity Apothecary, but people like in our networks like are often people that have been active in like the anarchist movement or like different social movements. And I know you've like been very active in the Welsh language movement. I just wondered like what have been your experiences of class like in those kind of movement spaces, like particularly?
Like it's mixed. Like at certain points it's felt like it was kind of the stable middle class family, like that I love my family so much, and their situations are not their fault. They've been dealt with some really hard cards in their lives, and they have given me as much as they could, and have they've done their best, and so have I. But like people being like at a young age getting involved in the Welsh language movement, and there were people, quite privileged people around, and it did for a moment feel like they were, it felt like a little bit like I'd like being in the family. And when I had my baby, they sent me a box of cakes, and they and the same with the anarchist movement. Like for a while it I really felt like family, because I've been estranged from a lot of my family, like for a long time, like, and on and off. So but when classism kind of comes up, and, intersecting with sexism and ableism, because I'm like dyslexic and dyspraxic and stuff, it is pretty painful, exactly because it feels like you're people, and you're struggling together to change, struggling to change things. But like I've had experiences of go just always, like, to be honest, the only time I ever did public speaking was with you in Empty Cages. I was involved for many years in lots of different groups, and I was kind of given like small opportunities to talk and stuff, but it was only really in Empty Cages that I was like supported to like host workshops on my own, something I never ever thought I'd do, like public speaking. And like I went to Cardiff Transformed this year, and it was like there was a panel on homelessness, and there was no homeless or formerly homeless people there, and it was just, to be honest, like activists that were doing really good work. But we all know that things should be led by the people most affected, but it's still not happening, like on all these panels and all these kind of situations. When we're even talking about class, it's always middle class kind of activists that are making their voices heard and being visible. And it's not, and there should be more effort to support people from the people from those backgrounds to talk, even if they don't do it perfectly. Their voices should be the center of any conversation. And it's 2023, like we already know this, but it's not really happening. I had some kind of weird experiences of classism in different there's countless, to be honest, and there's probably no point in like going through them all, but it's just it does happen relentlessly all the time. And sometimes when I bring it up, people deny that it's real, because class is not a protected characteristic on a par with other ones, because anyone really can say they're working class if their granddad was a miner or something. And because it's a bit intangible, like I even heard of a fund that basically removed working class as one of their protected characteristics or whatever, to use that liberal language, because it just meant everyone was just applying, and there was no way of really like checking or whatever. It does sound very strange. Like the class is a problem. And like you wrote that article that outlined, like, we talked a lot in Working with Empty Cages about classism that we encountered in organising. And when class is a struggle, you wrote that piece that kind of summarised a lot of those experiences. I don't know, like I've started writing about class, but I feel like I do it under a pen name, because I feel like if it feels really stigmatized still, and I feel like I don't want to talk about those things in a way that kind of it feels very exposing. And I just want to be able to write and have my stuff read without having to reveal everything about me. But when you do have stuff like a background that's a bit different to the norm that culture kind of tells you, because, there is a lot of underclass people, but it's portrayed as something very marginal and not the norm. But actually, there's a hell of a lot of people that have those experiences. But it's like, it's just, it just feels a bit exposing. Like, there was that whole time where Benefit Street, like, there was like a pornographic view of people's lives in poverty, and it was pretty unethical how they were filming those things. And it feels like if you have a struggle, you have to expose every part of yourself for any recognition. It feels like, that feels a little bit hard. And even though you want people to understand about your experiences, like, I don't particularly want to talk about these really difficult and uncomfortable things like all the time, but it does feel like there is a pressure to do this. Like, it feels like you're not really believed about your background unless you go and tell people absolutely everything. And I don't know. Organising is really hard. So yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, I think it's like, it's challenging, in it, like this kind of, like, almost like this like social capital somehow of like suffering, or like, like, and also that things are like fixed, right? Like, I think you named at the beginning that, like, sometimes someone can have a challenging childhood and like things then kind of like improve, or they have access to resources. Like I mentioned, like my mum, marrying a middle class man, and that just like changed everything for us. And so a lot of the stuff like I write about is sort of historical, but then obviously like all the prisoner support stuff means I'm still, being affected by, these sort of systems in different ways. But like, yeah, it is kind of like, just weird that like there's almost this like, I don't know, like just this like disclosure pressure or something, like in order to like access care or support from people, we have to somehow just like, like, like you said, like be hyper vulnerable, or like somehow like compete with like other people that have needs. And I think there's this kind of like weird oppression Olympics thing, right? Of like, oh, I don't really like deserve that because I'm not as like hard done by as like that person, like that goes back to fucking stupid like Monty Python, like, this like hideous, like horrible, like racist, classist, like comedy show from England, like, that's like decades old. But there's these two characters that are like, oh, well, I grew up in a box. And the other one's like, well, at least you had a box. And it's like, like the internet is a weird world. And it's like, it is weird, like how challenging it can feel to talk about this stuff. And that like, almost like you mentioned, to bring it back to the beginning about like meritocracy, of like people just kind of think like, why haven't you like climbed out of this mess? Do you know what I mean? Like, why are you still chaotic? Or, and I like was pretty broke like before I launched my course in February, and I just like was so full of self-loathing of like, Nicole, you're 35, like how are you back here again? Like without acknowledging like all the, chronic stress and bereavements and, horrible stuff with losing Taylor and everything. But it's like, anyway, I completely agree that it's like challenging to talk about. And I think like trauma in general is like challenging to talk about. And there is this like weird world of the internet where people are like somehow comparing themselves to each other, or I don't know. And I think like, I don't want to critique identity politics in the sense of like, I think it's like fucking important that people are talking about like racism and capitalism and gender and, like all of these things. But like, I think, there is also that like liberal, like neoliberal co-option of it, where it's like, become like very shallow, and it's become very much like, people's fucking privilege points and like what's in your fucking bio, and like, I think we talked about it before that like we're both bisexual, and like, like for some people that's like their access to resource, like, oh, I'm part of their LGBT community, like da da da. And like for us, like it's such a minor thing compared to other experiences of class that have like harmed us and shaped our lives. And like, but I know it's really difficult to think about like solutions. And like you mentioned like a couple of things like the Kurdish Solidarity Network and like, you know, people redistributing wealth. And like I do think projects like the Classworks project are doing like really interesting workshops where they're getting people to be really fucking honest about their resources and, you know, what they're going to inherit, and, you know, like encouraging people to distribute, like their resources. But I just wondered like if there's anything else you can think of that like, you know, has sort of inspired you politically recently, where people are kind of like showing up for each other more.
I feel like I haven't been able to be part of the political world like in a way that I would like to. Like people have tried to kind of support me to take part, but when I tried to do the campaign for amnesty for the young people that were arrested for riots in Ely, it completely like decimated my ability to function day to day. Like I was doing the campaign and I was not managing to, you know, do the keep clean, make hot food on time, healthy food. You know, I would just wasn't managing. So like I feel like a lot in the last 10 years, like I always thought that it's an important part of anarchism is making community, and for people that are stuck in the house, whether it's because they're disabled or have caring responsibilities, for people to go to those people. And, you know, I have friends from the movement that come and visit me sometimes, but it's like, you know, really there should be, you know, more of this. And like I and a lot of people are in really dire housing situation at the moment, and I try to reach out to like old networks locally about, you know, the idea of making some kind of trying to create some kind of initiative so that we can house ourselves in a cooperative way, and like also just things to kind of projects, because we were fighting austerity for like, you know, last 12 years or whatever, right? And, you know, austerity kind of won and we've been left with like nothing really. And so it just felt like the logical next step. Like the government is not looking after us. Obviously, we always knew this as anarchists. We need to create our own like organizations, institutions or whatever to look after each other and ourselves. But like when I kind of reached out, it was not really much. There was no response, and it does sometimes like the kind of bitter part of me feels like, well, you know, why would they? They all either own houses or have, you know, parents that they can live with or this and that. And, you know, there is some bitterness and jealousy that is a really ugly side of, you know, my class position that I am a bit ashamed of, because jealousy does come into it for me, because I do wish that, you know, that I had more resources, obviously. But like, it just feels like, you know, if there were people with that privilege that would really seriously consider doing the long-term, you know, difficult human interaction, like unglamorous work of building up things that cater for our needs. And, you know, these people, not just for anarchists and people on the left, but for every, you know, normal people that just want to live, because I'm not able to do much at all anymore, like hardly anything. Like I'm just grasping at being able to do anything politically by finding writing work where I can write about my experiences and my political analysis through that. Otherwise, I can't do anything. I've tried and it's just resulted in, you know, things falling apart. So like, yeah, accepting, basically creating things for people, and not necessarily just people on the left, anyone that needs it, and you know, working on that. And also like we need a way to like collectivize our experience as underclass and working class people and try and transcend those boundaries to some extent, so that we can have like a strong like working class identity. Because like underclass, it basically segments the respectable working class from the disrespectful, you know, the disgrace working class or whatever. And it's like that was a tool used by, you know, a divide and rule tool, so to turn working class people against each other, just how, you know, how racism is a tool for that. So it's like building things that kind of, you know, do things like this. And like, as a parent of a young child, all these churches have groups for little kids, and they have a snack and a drink, and people come together. Often people, mums that don't have, maybe are not working, don't have the money to work. Like, there's a people from different backgrounds there. Like, imagine if anarchists were running groups like this and doing things in the community. I know we're trying to stop all the bad things from happening, and fascism and all of this, and campaign after campaign, and fighting for the environment, but I feel like sometimes we're not really, we could be doing things like rooting in the community that could build something, rather than constantly trying to fight the state on this law, that law, this policy, that policy. Like, we're not fighting from a place of strength. And if we kind of, put our roots down in communities and created things that communities could use, and in this way, then we would be in a stronger position to like create something. Because it feels now like it has felt for a long time just firefighting, and not much success in that, despite everyone's really hard work. Like, people work themselves into the ground, burn themselves out, and that's it.
Well, yeah, that was like a serious mic drop moment of like, yeah, I completely agree that like, I think I've been part of sort of resistance movements for such a long time, and that's exactly what it is, right? It is just resistance. Like, it is pushing back, and that's really powerful too. Like, I'm fucking stoked that my county hasn't been turned into a fucking gas field, like from fracking or whatever. Like you said, like some of those wins are really important, or like a bunch of the prisons that we were fighting like didn't get built. But like, yeah, like I think what you said is really beautiful, and like about like rooting in and like providing those kind of like building that infrastructure of care. And I think part of why there isn't as much like movement focus on it is because it is just like so invisibilized. Like, caring labor, which is obviously extremely gendered, is like completely invisibilized, like completely devalued politically. Like, I remember when I was like, we were trying to develop this like incarcerated workers organizing committee group, like within the IWW, like the Industrial Workers of the World, which is a kind of like anarchist-esque union. Like, I remember going to their conference and like this dude like just talking about class and stuff, and I asked him something like in a workplace context, and I asked him about, well, what about like caring labor and like people excluded from the workplace who are actually fucking working all day long, right? Like, you don't fucking stop for breath, like looking after your little one. And yeah, and he just was like so dismissive, and it just felt like so tiring. Like, I can't believe we're still here where like, this stuff is like so just deemed as like so unimportant compared to like other forms of struggle somehow. And I think, yeah, what you shared is really, really important. Is there anything else you would like to kind of share, like before we finish, about class and trauma, like anything that's come up like as we're talking?
No, just thank you for inviting me to talk, and I just want to say my appreciation for all the stuff you've done. It's not on the Instagram 90% of what you do, and the things you've been through, and it's been a real source of strength to me to have a friend like you that gets it. And I've got some shared, we don't have shared history because we didn't grow up together, but you know what I mean? Like, we have some things from the way that we grew that, and it's, really good not to feel alone. So, I'm really proud of everything you've achieved, and like, you're a voice for people, and I'm glad that like people are listening, and just, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thanks so much for coming. And yeah, you've been just like, literally my best friend for years, and supported me through like hellish years of prisoner support that like no one else really understood. And yeah, I sometimes think that like two femmes who are like highly socialized to be hyper responsible, like we were actually like a massive fucking dream team when we were organizing together. But yeah, I love you loads, and yeah, thank you so much for your time and energy. And yeah, I'll put the links to some of the books and things you mentioned. And if there's any other resources, just let me know and I'll share them in the show notes. But otherwise, thank you so much again for your time, and thanks everyone for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.